Hello, everybody. It is I, your favorite English teacher, Profe Kyle. And I'm continuing with my interviews because I want you guys to hear more English because that's what you guys want. And well, in today's case, I want to give you guys another perspective on learning languages. So I've invited Lukas here from Effortless Conversations and also the co-owner of, is it called Spring Spanish? I want to make sure I got it right. Spring Spanish?
Spring Languages and Spring Spanish is one of our brands indeed. Yeah.
So Lukas is very involved in the polyglot community, and now he's also involved in, I guess, the language learning business community because he has his own business. So we're going to ask him questions about language learning, about his journey learning languages, and also about his business. And hopefully you guys enjoy it. So Lukas, welcome to the show. I'll say a show, even though it feels kind of strange because we're just two guys in front of a camera. But welcome. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thanks very much for having me on your show. You can call it a show.
Yeah, the Profe Kyle show. Well, you're in Belgium, correct?
Yeah, correct.
So obviously for me, it's 10 in the morning, and for you, is it 6 or 8?
Yeah, it's 6 right now, 6 p.m. Yeah.
All right. So yeah, Lukas, he's in another completely different part of the world. So Lukas, maybe in your own words, because I think anybody watching this is not going to know who you are at all. I know a little bit about you because I like to keep my ear to the ground of the polyglot community, but for regular Latinos, which is my audience, they're not going to know anything about you. So yeah, who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, so I'm Lukas, like you just said, Kyle. I'm a linguist. So I studied applied linguistics at university to become a translator and an interpreter. That's what I did when I started out because I love languages. After that, I decided not to become a translator or interpreter, but to get started in the online language education world, in the blogging world. I thought I'm going to start a blog about language learning, travel the world, learn languages, meet new people, and then write about the process. Right. My first blog was called The Polyglot Life. Now it's Effortless Conversations, but that's how I started.
So what year was that?
That was in 2016, I think. That's when I started.
Yeah, so it's not too long ago.
No, right. six years ago. So that's how I started. So I started writing content about how to learn languages, moved to Italy because I wanted to try out some new methods of learning languages. And at that point, I just thought, okay, there's like something that I didn't really enjoy in the way we learn languages at university. Because it was very much focused on words and grammar rules. Sometimes we had to learn like word lists of like 3,000 words for an exam and then just answer questions about like the words and translations. It was very, very hard and not really useful. So I didn't like that very much. When I was in Italy, I thought, okay, I'm going to like learn a language from scratch my own way. And I tried and worked quite well. It was focused way more on observing native speakers and on using dialogues. We'll get into that later, I guess.
Talk about chunky
Yeah, it worked really well. And then I discovered, well, there's actually like scientific research that supports this way of language learning. But not that many people were talking about it. There's some teachers were talking about it, but I didn't see many people in like the language learner community talk about it. Not even polyglots, even though most of them were doing it, I think. So I decided, well, I'm going to write more content about that and figure out like, how does this work? Can I turn this into a methodology that's useful for language learners and that people can use themselves to learn a language as well? Wrote a book called Effortless Conversations, in which I explain this method. It's called chunking. Conversation-based chunking.
It's nice and short.
Yeah, it's a short read, nothing too special, just a short methodology book. It's on Amazon. You can read it in one afternoon, I guess.
That's why I just read it in one afternoon.
It's very short. I wrote that book, started speaking on some conferences about this method, conversation-based chunking. Changed the blog name to Effortless Conversations. I thought it was a good name, not because it's effortless to learn a language, but because if you do it the right way, at some point it can become effortless to speak. You don't have to think that much more about words and grammar rules and all that stuff. You just speak. So that's basically what I did for a long time. Wrote a book, wrote blog posts on chunking, talked about it on podcasts, got more and more engaged in the polyglot community. Like you said, there are various events around the world, polyglot conference, polyglot gathering, for example. There was one in Cholula a couple of weeks ago.
Really?
At the end of October in Puebla, right?
Okay,
which
I
was
didn't
a
know
lot
about that. Oh, I probably would have went if I would have known. Okay.
I
got to pay more attention. Yes. Because I want to talk about that as well because you're from Europe and normally I was kind of jealous of the European guys because there's always conferences and
Yeah.
it's so far away and it's very expensive. So like, I'm not going to go to Slovakia for,
No,
one
exactly.
weekend and fly back. So
Yeah.
it's difficult. So yeah, if I would have known it was in Latin America, I probably would have
Yeah,
tried
it
to
was the
check it
first
out.
time. Too
Okay.
bad you weren't there. It was a lot of fun. There were a lot of creators, other people who
Mm,
will also create language learning content.
okay.
Um, so yeah, that was fun. What was I saying? Oh yeah, so I went to a lot of these conferences. Then I started working with some YouTubers
Okay.
who had audience already. They already were helping people to learn German, for example, or English or other languages. And I started helping them implement this method, right? Chunking
Okay.
into their courses, help them a
Okay.
bit with the marketing, with like the whole course setup and all that stuff. So I did that for a while, and then at some point I thought, well, this is fun, but I kind of want to have my own channels, my own platforms as well. And that's when I met Gabriel a couple of years ago
Okay.
at one of these conferences. Actually, the one that you mentioned in Slovakia. I think that's where
Okay.
I met
I think
Gabriel.
that's it was like 20. Was it what year was that Slovakia conference? 2016 as well, when you first
They
started?
do. There was several years in a row that they did it
Okay.
at the same
Yeah.
place. I think in 2018 or so is when I met Gabriel, and then in
Okay.
2020 we decided, okay, so we have this method, conversation-based chunking, that works really well. We've seen that on YouTube, and you know that as well. A lot of language learners go to YouTube. They like being on YouTube to learn languages. They love consuming content there. Let's combine that, right? Let's find some teachers to help people learn Spanish. That was our first idea.
Yeah.
Teach them the methodology, teach them how to teach with chunking,
Yeah.
and create content, create a lot of content, create courses around that, and see if we can grow a YouTube channel, if we can help students learn languages that way. It works really well. In the meantime, we've also used take one of these teachers, Paulissima is her name, and start Spring English, right? So that's another brand. It's actually very similar to yours, I guess. It's very, very small right now, where we do one video a week. We teach Latinos or people from Latin American countries English, make some videos there. We're starting German now. So that's basically what I've been focusing on mainly. I still have my own blog where I've blog on language learning more in general. It's more of like a methodology blog. So it's more about...
Is that Effortless Conversations?
Yeah, effortlessconversations.com. That's where I blog more about methodology things, and Spring Languages is the implementation. That's where you go if you want to learn languages through chunking.
Yeah, and I can really respect that, because a lot of people talk about methodology, but then they don't put it into practice. And in your case, you found this methodology and you want to see if it works, and you're making it work. You're testing it out with people.
Yes, exactly, because it can work for me, but then that doesn't mean that everyone learns that way. What I've seen so far, though, is that even if people say they don't learn through chunking, most people still do, but they just don't realize it, right? It's just something that comes very, we'll talk about it in a second. It's something that comes very natural, to you learn language as a kid, but also just in general. It's just a very natural way of learning. And even if you learn in other ways, somehow deep inside your brain, it still happens, right? And that's something I didn't know. In the beginning, I thought this works for me. Will it work for other people? We've done it with tens of thousands of students now. Seems to work for most people. So
I want to talk a lot about the methodology and about learning with chunking. But just to start off, I want to make sure we learn a little bit about you, especially with Latinos. Latinos, they always, I don't trust this guy unless I know their entire backstory. So you were born and raised in Belgium, correct?
Yeah.
Right. Now, I don't know a lot about Belgium. It's not really my expertise. The country, it's a small country. I know that you guys speak French, Flemish, is it called? Is that what's called?
Correct.
Yeah. Is there also another language, or just the two, the Flemish and
there's a
German
very small part
in
Belgium where the official language is German. It's I think 60 or 70,000 people, so it's very small. But it's an official language in Belgium. They have their own parliament, their own president, and everything.
Oh, really? Oh, I didn't know that part.
Yeah, and then French. I think we're 11 million people in Belgium. 4 million people have French as their mother tongue, and then 7 million Flemish. And Flemish is a dialect of Dutch, right? It's a bit like US English and British English, for example, right? So it's more or less the same, but it's a different pronunciation than Dutch that's spoken in the Netherlands. It's very separated, though. Most people assume, you have several official languages, so everyone speaks all
like mixing together.
No, like you literally even have a language frontier, right? A literal, officially, put into the law like a language frontier. In the north, we speak Flemish. In the south, French, and that's the only official language. And if you go to the government services, they
Yeah.
won't help you in Dutch in the south. They won't help you in French in the north.
Really?
It's very,
Oh,
very
yeah.
separated. Yeah.
Yeah, because in Canada we have French and English, but it's very similar. Whereas in the people that speak French live in Quebec, and the people who speak English live in the rest of Canada.
Yeah.
But if you go to the grocery store, yeah, everything is in English and French. And if you go to the post office or a government office, if you want French, they have to find somebody to speak to you in French. But in Belgium, it's a little bit different where if you go to the French speaking part, just French,
it's
no one
only
will help you.
French.
Right?
Only in Brussels. Brussels is officially bilingual, so there you can be helped. I mean, you're supposed to find someone who helps you in French or in Dutch. Usually it's French and Dutch, not always.
Okay. And is there, well, I'm curious about history, because I study political science. And so in Belgium, is it friendly relations between the two cultures, or is there a little bit of animosity like in Canada between the English and the French?
There's quite some animosity. I'm not gonna, I mean, I don't want to like
sugarcoat
crazy
things,
debates here, of course. But there is some animosity. It's just very divided, the country. So even we don't vote for the same politicians, we can't. It's just like, it's completely separate. I mean, it's a federal state, right? So you have Flanders, Walloon region where they speak French, a German region, then Brussels is separate. They all have their own parliaments, their own presidents, their own politicians. There's a federal government, but even for the federal government, we have a prime minister right now who's Flemish, which means that everyone who lives in the French-speaking part, they couldn't even vote for him. Like it's not possible. You vote for your politicians, and then they come together and decide who's a prime minister and who gets all the other. And sometimes it's 7 million people in the north. That's the majority. If we have a French-speaking prime minister, then 7 million people, like the majority, have never even voted for that person. Didn't choose for him. Didn't choose for his policies. So that's very, very. Everything is separated, which is, it leads to problems because, you don't feel any affinity with the other part of it. And also it's so separated in terms of language that we don't watch the same TV series. The news anchors are different. There's no like Belgian news, right? There's Flemish news and there's the Walloon news, and then probably in the German speaking part they have their news. It's a different language. Our celebrities are separated by language, right? So there's like we know some people from the south, like the most famous. Often it's like the people who talk more about politics, like the political journalists we might know.
I'm
Maybe
guessing
some singers,
the soccer players as well.
Soccer players. That's probably the only time when we really feel
united. The only time United is watching soccer.
And it's not necessarily that we don't feel we're Belgian, but it's more like, I mean, if everything is separated, if you don't speak the same language, if you don't watch the same series, you don't have the same cultural background, you grew up with different heroes, with different people you see on TV or in the news, media figures, different politicians, everything is so separated that it's hard to feel as one. And then there's economic differences as well. So there's quite some resource transfer going on. In the past, it was from the south to the north.
Same thing in Canada.
So
it creates I don't want to be sending my money to those socialists or those Frenchies or those.
And that happens a lot, right? And in the past, it was the other way around. In the past, it was the southern part of Belgium, the French-speaking part had steel mines, and it was like economically it was just like wealthier. And then there was resource transfer to the north. Now it's the other way around. Flanders has more information technology, a little bit more of a modern economy. So now it's wealthier.
And Flanders is the French part, right?
Sorry?
Flanders is the French part, right?
Flanders is the Dutch speaking part.
Dutch part, because I think for Canadians it's famous because that's where the big famous World War I battle was, right?
Fields.
In Flanders,
Flanders Field. Exactly. That was in Flanders, so in the north of Belgium. So now it shifted, and now there's a lot of resource transfer to the south, and then people, they get angry about that. It's hard. It works, Belgium, but it's not easy to make it all work.
And like, do they want to? Because it seems I've seen this in other parts of the world too. I'm just curious, your own perspective. It seems kind of obvious. Well, the Dutch-speaking part become part of the Netherlands, and the French-speaking part become part of France. But I guess similar with Switzerland, kind of same thing. Like just go to France. So is there a reason why you guys don't want to separate and just go to the country which has your own language?
Yeah, so there's always people who say that would be a good idea.
Yeah.
There are other solutions proposed, like Flanders becoming like a small state,
Okay.
a bit like, like Luxembourg or something like that, or
Okay. Yeah.
one of these smaller states, and then the southern part also.
Mm-hmm.
People don't do it, I think, because it's very, very complicated, first of all, and
So
it will
like,
lead to,
it's
we
too
also have
difficult.
we're a
Yeah.
kingdom as well, so we have a
Oh,
royal
okay.
family who
Yeah.
keeps everything together.
Okay.
The biggest party in Flanders
Mm-hmm.
is a officially separatist party. So
Okay.
they want to, not necessarily, they want more autonomy for Flanders.
Okay.
Doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily mean they want to separate completely or split up the country.
Yeah.
But they want more autonomy. And
Okay.
that could be just more resources and more competences go to Flanders, to the states, and less to the federal government.
Okay.
Or it could be completely separate, just a separate state or country, or part of the Netherlands. They're always looking for solutions, alternatives, but it's very hard. Also, in general, like the way it's set up in Belgium, like the whole the constitution, and you need like 2/3 majorities to do stuff like that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like checks and balances to make sure that every part of Belgium is equally represented.
Yeah.
Which makes all that stuff really hard. Everyone needs to agree.
Yeah.
But this is something that in the past 10, 20, it's always been like problematic. But lately, I think the past 10 years, maybe even, the biggest party has been a separatist party in Flanders.
Yeah.
In the south, not so much, right?
Okay.
There is difference in the Walloon, like in the French-speaking part, but in Flanders, it's politics, it's hard.
No, it sounds very similar to Canada. We have the same like 2/3 majority in order to get things done, and trying to make sure every region is represented. It sounds very similar, very similar.
Yeah.
All right. So, and now I'm just guessing, you look more German than French. Are you from the Dutch speaking part of? Yeah.
I'm from the Dutch speaking part. Yeah, from Flanders. Yeah.
All right. And so I'm guessing your first language obviously was Dutch.
Dutch. Yeah. Flemish.
Now,
Dutch. Yeah.
So similar thing, because I'm from Canada, lots of people just assume that I speak French because I'm from a bilingual country. But in your case, did you learn French when you were a kid, or was it pure Dutch and maybe English when you got into high school?
So we learned French, or at least I don't know how it is nowadays, but when I was a kid, at the age of 10, you start learning French at school.
Yeah.
A couple of hours a week. And these are normal language classes like you would get in other countries. And also, you never use French in your daily life. And it is very important to start, like if you don't live in Quebec, you're not gonna use French like in your day-to-day life. It's exactly the same in Belgium. If you go to Antwerp, which is a city in Flanders where I'm from, if you speak French to people, they will probably tell you to switch to English, because they're very uncomfortable speaking French. Not everyone, but most people. That's how it is, right? So you learn it as a kid, but you don't really speak it that well. Same in the southern part. You learn Dutch at school, but then you never use it, so you don't speak it well, right? That's exactly the same. So I guess I grew up monolingual, but then I always liked languages as a kid as well. So French, I enjoyed. Then at the age of 14, I think we started with English at school. We have a bit of German as well, but very little, maybe 1 hour a week. So it's very similar to other countries, I guess. You learn some languages at school. You might have a little bit more exposure because we're in Europe, and Belgium is a small country. Like you drive 2 hours.
I'm always jealous about that. You guys can just drive everywhere, take a train, and you guys are in
Paris, you take a train. 2 hours later, you're in Germany, or you can cross the whole of Belgium in, I think, 3 hours by car. So you can go from Germany, Belgium, France, and then you have all these languages, right? So there's more exposure. We watch TV. Everything is subtitled in Belgium.
Oh, okay.
We don't dub anything. So most of it is in English, sometimes in French or languages. So that helps a lot with English, not with other languages. But so.
Because I want to ask you about that, about learning English, because my ancestry is Swedish, and the first language I learned was Swedish. And one thing about Swedish people is that they're really good at English. Of course, there's that Swedish accent, which isn't very strong, but it's kind of funny. It's like very robotic. Hello. My name is Lars. I am from Sweden. But I think the Dutch and Belgians, well, it seems like from the Flanders part, are also really good at learning English. And you said right now that you didn't start learning English until 14, but you speak incredible English. do you accredit that to everything was subtitled and you watched English, or is there another secrets to why those people in that part of the world learn English so well? Or is it just it's very similar to English, so it's not that difficult?
So I think Dutch is quite similar to English, first of all. People often describe it when they learn Dutch as like it's a mix of German and English, right? So that's what it sounds like or feels like when they learn it. So it's similar. That helps. Same with Swedish, I think. It's I mean, Swedish is similar to Dutch as well. So all of that makes it easier. But I think the main difference is exposure, right? You just, from like a very young age, you watch everything in English. Maybe like Harry Potter. I remember Harry Potter, if you go to the cinema when these movies came out, they were in Dutch or Flemish for kids. And like Disney movies, Pixar movies, all of that is in Dutch, of course. But I think all the rest is just in English, and you watch it in English, and you read the subtitles. And if you do that every day, I mean, you know how much people like watch the TV, right? If you do that for 2 hours a day, well, you learn, right? And then internet makes, I think, a lot of stuff is in English as well. Like on the internet, you read in English, you see all of that. So that makes it much easier. I think it's mainly exposure. It just, you're exposed. I mean, if you live in France, for example, everything is a bigger country. So you have more French movies, more content in French, probably.
Well, the French,
it's dubbed.
I think that the French also seem very proud about, like, I'm not going
to. And they're very proud.
They're
like, no, we have everything in French, and they don't want to use like loan words, like software, even logiciel and stuff
not
like
at all,
that.
not at all.
So all of that's very different. We also, with fun fact, by the way, in Dutch or in Flanders at least, we subtitle everything. So we even subtitle Flemish-speaking people. If you watch the news, and someone is interviewed,
so it's not even like that black scrolling subtitles. It's like
actual
right in the broadcast subtitles.
Like you have a news broadcast, it will always be subtitled. So if I would be interviewed in Dutch by Flemish by Flemish television, I would be subtitled. It's also because we have strong dialects, and some parts of Belgium it's hard to understand what they say. But like sometimes there's also like satirical programs who like TV programs who make fun of that everything is subtitled. I don't know why, but we're so used to subtitles that we have it in English, we have it in Dutch, we have it in Flemish, in French, like everything is subtitles.
All right. Actually, is there a favorite? Sometimes it's surprising. Is there a favorite show from United States or Britain or from another part of the world that I guess the Dutch-speaking Belgian people watch that might be surprising for somebody outside of Belgium? Like, is it Friends? Is it 2.5 Men? Is it Monty Python? Is there like something that, for whatever reason, all Dutch-speaking Belgians watch?
I wouldn't know right now anymore, but I mean, I sound very old. I'm not. But I mean, it's still a different generation now with like TikTok and everything that that grows up in a very different way than I did. Right? Friends. A lot of people watch Friends in Belgium. I don't know if that's still the case, but that was for me. A lot of people watch like Big Bang Theory, How I Met Your Mother. These were the series but this was more in my 20s, I think. Earlier.
I guess one reason I'm asking is because when I learned Swedish, and then when I went to Sweden, something that surprised me is Donald Duck. Do you know Donald Duck? For whatever reason, Swedish people love Donald Duck, and they call it Kalle Anka.
Or does he? He speaks a little bit.
I was like, why do you guys like Kalle Anka? And they couldn't really give me an answer, but especially at Christmas, they would be watching all these Kalle Anka shows, and it was very confusing for me. So that's one reason why I wanted to ask you if there's something weird in Belgium that you guys all watch.
No, Donald Duck we watched. What was The Sound of Music is still a very popular.
I think I know what it is, but I haven't watched it in such a long time.
I don't think it's American, but this is something that people always watch in Belgium. The Sound of Music. I don't know. I can't remember what I watched when I was younger. It's a lot of. It was more it's a lot of Belgian TV, but it's more the movie. So if there's a movie, then it's usually it's usually an American movie. That's on TV.
All right. Now, what made you want to study linguistics? Because that was your degree, right? When you went to university, was applied linguistics.
Applied linguistics,
Because so your first language is Dutch. You start learning English when you're 14 years old, but I'm guessing that's the same for all people in Belgium. So what made you different? What made you decide to study that career or that field?
I don't know actually. So I always liked languages, just as a kid already. I think even when I was like 9 or 10, I told everyone like, I want to become an interpreter. Everyone was firefighter, pilot, whatever, rocket scientist. And I was, I'm going to be an interpreter, right?
Yeah.
Because my mom told me what it was, and I was like, oh, that sounds cool. And then I wanted to do that. So I like languages already. I traveled to France often with my parents, and then I liked like ordering in baguette or something like it when I was like 6 years old. And then you got like something like some candy, or you got a free croissant or something like that. And I was always very happy. So I already liked it back then. I don't know. I was always good at it. I liked it. And yeah, I didn't know what to study for a while when I was like 18. At the age of 18, we have to decide where you go in Belgium and what you're going to study. And yeah, then I just read more about interpreters working at the EU, which is, it seemed interesting to me. So it's a well-paid job, so that's nice. You get to learn languages. I like learning languages. I find it interesting, even just in general, not even just to speak it with other people, more like the act of learning a new language. It's kind of like an intellectual challenge. Simultaneous interpretation is also pretty cool. There's a movie about it, The Interpreter, which is a fun movie to watch with Nicole Kidman. But it's hard, right? You see people and they listen like with one headphone, like to one language, and then they're speaking at the same time, like translating it. And then, so it was like translation, but then like the hard mode, translation where you have time to think and look at the dictionary, and then you have like a God mode, like they say with the games, right? And then you have to like listen and speak at the same time. You don't have time to think, don't have time to write things down. So that was all pretty cool. And I was like, well, this is interesting, like an intellectual challenge. So that's what I wanted to do in Belgium. If you want to do that, you start with applied linguistics, and then you do a master's degree in a postgraduate degree in interpretation, for example. So yeah, that's why I decided to study languages. And I enjoyed it, but I didn't enjoy it that much because it was 3 years of very inefficient language learning to then finally start with that one degree.
I imagine. And I never studied applied linguistics, but it always seemed interesting. Yeah, just like you, like, oh, I like languages. That would have been a good idea to study applied linguistics. But I guess I always wondered, for somebody who studies it, do you guys also have to study multiple languages at the same time? How does that work with the actual language learning? So you learn the methodology about the field, but I'm guessing you also have to learn a language or multiple languages.
Yeah, and that's the main difference with like normal linguistics. You can study linguistics and then applied linguistics. In applied linguistics, this is how it is in Belgium. I don't know if it's the same in other countries, but I suppose it is. With applied linguistics, you learn to apply the language and apply the methods, right? So you choose 2 languages. You have your mother tongue, where they help you learn your mother tongue, which sounds a bit weird maybe, but I mean, it's necessary.
Did it work? Did you become much smarter in Dutch?
Yeah, maybe I got a bit better in, like, there were some things that I thought, oh, I didn't know that was wrong, that I used to understand this. And you learn public speaking a little bit and that kind of stuff. And then I did English and German. Because I wanted to learn German, and it's hard. And I thought, well, I might not learn this by myself because it's just a hard language to learn, and you need a lot of dedication for that. And I thought, well, I'm studying it at university, so then I'll learn German really well. It's a useful language in Belgium, so that's why I chose that. And in English, because like you say, people in Belgium, the Netherlands, Sweden as well, we learn English up to a high degree, like naturally, but learning English like up to a really high degree, or up to the degree where you can write books or do research or whatever, that was really hard. And it was unexpected. The German was way easier than English at university. In general, no, like German is still more like harder to speak. But English was very, very, very hard, both in terms of like the linguistic part and getting it up to a high level, where like with the assignments we got, it was really hard. Like I struggled way more with English, I think, because we learn in such a natural way that like you're happy with the way you speak, and then you don't really try to get it up to the next level. So but you choose languages, you choose 2, and you can have Spanish, Italian, Arabic, Russian, French, whatever you want.
Well, maybe somebody can connect with that. For you, what was the most difficult thing about learning English? Why was it so difficult to master? Or was it just because you were focused on such a highly advanced version of English, that's why it was difficult? Or was there maybe something you didn't expect to be difficult? Maybe, common thing like phrasal verbs, like maybe you didn't realize phrasal verbs were so complex, and that's why it was so difficult to master.
Phrasal verbs complex, but a bit less, again, because I was already using kind of like the chunking methodology, which I didn't know back then, but then I was, I mean, that always came natural to me. So I did that. So that was not that hard. Like grammar, some of it was super abstract and really, really philosophical stuff about grammar that we just didn't get in other languages. In other languages, you learn the grammar that explain the language, but in English, we had to do all these philosophical ruminations on like, where does the energy flow in a sentence from the subject, and then it sinks into an object. All this stuff was really complicated. Adverbs, I mean, it was very, 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 very advanced, and I still don't understand why we
sounds like it.
Sounds like something
that was hard. I wouldn't want. Even I wouldn't want to do that. No.
Like, I don't even remember that much.
Actually, I did that in university once. I wanted to do an easy course. So I said, okay, I'm going to take, look, here's English grammar. So I said, okay, I'm going to take English grammar. And it ended up being one of my worst courses that I took. I even for myself, I didn't understand my own language very well.
No,
it's embarrassing.
So that, I think phrasal verbs or adverbs, like the placement of adverbs, and that's always difficult. I know there's like you have these rules for them, but still, like, you create a sentence and then it feels like you can just put the adverbs in wherever you want, and it still sounds maybe fine, unless you're a native speaker. Then you know, oh no, this adverb of time need to go all the way to the back, or needs to be in the middle, and then so all these things that I find pretty hard. And then we were learning to write research papers, so you learn a lot of difficult vocabulary. I think also what was very hard was verbs in general, like tenses. When do you use a present perfect? When do you use a simple past? Especially these two. That's like.
Are there a lot more in English compared to Dutch, in your opinion? Because they're very similar languages, so I'm just curious if there's a difference.
No, but there's like stricter rules. I think. Especially with simple past and present perfect. Like when you need to use it.
Yeah, it's true.
You have like since, and when you use since, you always have to use present perfect. So that kind of stuff, it doesn't come natural. Even for me now, after learning English for so long, working in English, I've written a book in English, I wrote hundreds of thousands of words and emails in English. It's still hard, and I feel it kind of when I need to use which one, and I know the rules, but then it's still not always sure. So that's hard. Even future tenses, like I will do this, I'm going to do this, it's going to rain, because it's like a little bit more probable. So then you need to use going to, and then this is super probable, so you need to use simple present, because it's just a timetable, and then it's just the train leaves and is going to leave. So all that stuff, it was complicated, but I think it was more complicated because there were such high standards. Right? It was not just I learned this, and I mean, you will understand if I say you're going to understand me, if I say this, or I say you'll understand me, or you understand me. You understand what I mean, right?
Yeah, naturally, I probably could think of the difference right now, but naturally, I mean, okay, I know it.
It's like, you know what I mean, but that was not enough, because I was at university and we learned these rules, and it was like, which one do you use here and why? And then that was very stressful. And I think for a lot of students, that caused more problems, because then they got super nervous about using English and speaking English. Instead of just speaking, and
it's true.
Maybe getting it wrong once in a while. Like we're doing this interview, I've made many mistakes already.
Actually, no, I haven't. Well, for me, I haven't really heard a mistake. Normally, I
would notice,
but no. So far, you're doing good. According to my standards, but who knows? Maybe Canadians, Americans, we have lower standards for languages than the Europeans.
Well, and it's your mother tongue. Like if you speak Dutch to me, I'll be like, oh, you speak really well. But I mean, you make mistakes, and that's fine. But at university, when you have an actual like a grammar exam, like it needs to be all correct, right? And then you get so confused about going to or will or a simple present word. What do I need to use? And then when you try to speak, you also start thinking about all these things, and then it gets complicated. So that was very hard. I think that was maybe the thing that confused me the most, and I think a lot of other students as well.
Okay. All right. Now, you talked about a master's degree. When you graduated, did you just take the master's degree, or did you already know at that time, I don't know if this is really for me, I'd rather go in a different direction?
I studied, like I did one exchange semester in Edinburgh in Scotland, which I liked a lot. And after that, I was in my last years of my undergraduate, my bachelor's degree. And then I knew already that I wanted to go abroad again and study abroad again for a year. Now, the master's degree in interpretation is only 1 year. So I decided to do that one. And then I looked for another one in international relations, actually, political science. Because I thought I want to work for the EU, the European Union, as an interpreter. it might be useful that I know more about institutions, about politics, because that's what I'm like going to work with. If I'm in parliament or like interpreting something, then they will be speaking about these topics.
Yeah.
It was a trilingual degree. It was fun. So I knew I'm going to do master's degree, then the trilingual master's, an extra master's degree, right, in international relations.
Yeah.
1 year. It was in France and in Germany.
Okay.
And then I was planning on coming back. You have to do some sort of postgraduate certification to become a conference interpreter, which is also quite hard, but that's when they actually train you like for the simultaneous interpretation and like all that stuff.
Okay.
So my plan was to do all of that and then start working for the EU. But then that year when I was studying abroad, after finishing my master's degree and after like, or while doing the second one in international relations, I knew like, I don't want to go back and sit in a dusty office somewhere in Brussels. I want to travel and I want to learn more languages and do my own thing and, you know, like live abroad and just get some more live experience before I lock myself up in an office in some sort of career path in public policy where, you know, you have a very, how do you say that? Like you do a couple of years and then you like seniority is very important. No? Before you take an exam or you get to this position, you first have to do 5 years in this position and then take an exam and blah, blah. So I didn't want to do that. So yeah, that's basically when it changed. I was abroad. It was like, this is a good life, you know, like speaking all these languages. It's interesting. You're in a new culture. And I want more of that.
Yeah, a lot of fun. So which countries, so you graduate from all those degrees, so you're a highly educated man, but after finishing all that, it sounds interesting. Did you find a remote job? Did you start teaching English in a different country? How did you manage to live your dream of traveling and learning languages, or what did you do after that?
So the first year, what did I do? I moved to Italy and I did some translation work. So I had some savings. My parents helped me as well during my studies, and then they supported like part of my living expenses for 9 more months, which was a big help because I mean, you start out with like your own business, you don't make any money. I had some translation clients already that I already had when I was studying, so I did some like work on the side and had some savings from that, from working as a student already. And then I just started and I moved abroad, and then I didn't make that much money. I was living off my savings and like the occasional translation work, I think for a year and a half. And then that was when I started sustaining myself with what I was doing. But it took a while, like a year and a half.
Okay. And that was with translation, or did you change? Did you go in another direction and start working in a different area?
Yeah, that was with the blog. So I started the blog almost right away when I stopped, when I finished my degree.
Yeah.
So what I did was I did translation work. I started a blog. I started learning about marketing and online. Marketing and business and everything that comes like with
like you learned copywriting and web design, and all that stuff,
web design, how to create courses, like the tech part, but also like the funnel part, like they say. Right?
Yes,
a good word maybe for your students, like your marketing funnels. I don't even know how to say that in Spanish actually.
I think they use marketing funnels. I lived in a co-living building in Bogota a few months ago, and there's a whole bunch of young guys doing marketing, and I asked them how to say it. I think there might be a word, but I think many Latinos just say funnels. But
well, anyone watching this interview, leave it in the comments if you know how to say funnel in Spanish. So I started doing that. I started learning about all of that, creating some content. I created the first course actually, maybe 6 or 7 months after I started.
And which course was that? Because I see like on the Spring Languages, there's one course for Spanish. Is it the Spanish course that you created, or was it a different course that you created?
No, that was way later. Well, I started out with a course on language learning methodology. It was it was a language learning routine masterclass, I think I called it. Very fancy name, right? So it was more about how to set up a language learning routine. What's important, right? How do you set up a routine that you stick to, that doesn't overwhelm you? It was a bit about habit creation, about resource selection, about not overwhelming yourself. That was the first thing I did. And then I sold it maybe for $40 or something like that. Promoted it on Facebook as well. It worked quite well.
Yeah.
That's how I started growing. Then right after that, I discovered this whole thing about chunking,
Yeah,
right? Where I found out, okay, this is like a method actually that I can use, and it's working for me very well for Italian, which I was learning at the time. And then I created a course around that. I called it the vocab cycle back then, and the cycle of how to learn vocabulary.
Yeah.
And I created a small course around that as well. It was usually just a couple of videos and some worksheets. I still have them. I don't sell them right now. I might start offering them again on my website. I'm working on like something new on effortless conversations, where I combine like the more methodology courses, right? But that's how I started. So then I started doing that, and then they started selling. Wasn't making that much money from it, but I was doing some translation work at the same time. And I mean, that worked well. Students were happy, so that was fun. And then I just started going to more conferences and meet more people and start collaborating with others as well. I created some of my own courses first. I think in 2018, that's when I started with some language courses based on chunking. Very first iteration of some of the courses that we still have right now. And that worked well, and I did that. And then I also started collaborating with others and to create courses for them or with them based on chunking, and then like use someone's audience or someone who already had an audience for learning German, for example. And then we created a course, and then we sold that course to these people. And that's when I started kind of like implementing chunking in my own courses, in other people's courses as well. So basically that's just how it grew. Like I started with
kind of like organically, just slowly shifted away from the translation to becoming more of a language learning entrepreneur.
Yeah, exactly. So that's mainly what I do. I still do some translation sometimes, which is fun. I translate screenplays for production houses. So it's not subtitles, it's actually the screenplays. Right. So I help people like these production houses who need to sell their ideas to other countries. And they write, for example, a screenplay in Dutch. They want to sell it to another production house in Denmark or US or UK. They need it in English, all the documents. It's fun because you learn a lot from that, right? You learn storytelling and structure and how to like build a story and character development, dialogue, all of that. So that's why I still do it, because it's fun and you learn a lot from it. That's the only thing. Once in a while I do something like that. Other than that, it just shifted away from translation into what I actually wanted it to be. Right? It's just more writing.
Sounds good. Well, I think just talking about marketing, storytelling is such an important thing to have. So I can understand why you want to keep on doing it, just so you can get better at copywriting and storytelling for sure. And also just creating courses. I don't think I have the same methodology, or maybe it is very similar, but like I use stories to teach my students. So it's good to create interesting stories for the people who are learning with you.
Exactly.
So let's talk about chunking then. May as well get into it because we're on the topic already. So in your own words, what is chunking, and how is it different than, I guess, your typical vocabulary list or learning a word by itself?
So the main idea behind chunking and conversation-based chunking, I'll get to that in a second, is that it's just much easier to speak a language if you start by listening to what native speakers say, who are already speaking the language, and just imitate what they're saying, even if you don't understand the grammar, right? As opposed to learning words and grammar rules. Because what happens when you learn words and grammar rules? Well, let's say that you start with like a word list, 600 most frequent words, or 1,000 or 2,000, like I had to do for German at university, right? You know all the words, you might recognize them when someone says something, but if you want to use them in a sentence, you don't know how, right? And then you think, oh, I need to know the grammar rules, because then I can use rules to string together sentences, and then I'll take the words and then apply rules while I'm in a conversation, and I'll try to invent a sentence, which almost never works, because it's, first of all, super hard. Like you're not, like your brain isn't wired to think about a rule when you're speaking, like just way too slow, right? You can't do that. And another problem is that usually when you do that, you use the frame of reference of your mother tongue when you speak English, for example. Let's say your Spanish is your mother tongue. You're going to translate word from Spanish into English. Why? Well, because you think, I want to say, well, let's say mucho gusto, right? I want to say to Kyle, mucho gusto. Right? Okay, what is mucho in English? Much. What is gusto? Pleasure, something like that. So maybe, I'm not sure that's what native speakers say, but then I'll say much pleasure, right? which is wrong, right? You just can't translate word for word. And you will do this all the time because you just don't know what a native speaker say. And also much pleasure, it's grammatically correct. There's nothing wrong with much pleasure, right? It's grammatically correct, but nobody says it. And so you're using your mother tongue and you're just translating word for word. And then you're like, oh, this might not be correct, but I don't know why. Right? So you're inventing sentences from scratch. You don't have to do that, right? If you just listen to us, for example, having a conversation now, right? Yeah. Let's say in the beginning, I don't know if we actually said it, but let's suppose we say, Kyle, nice to meet you. I'm Lucas. And you'll say, nice to meet you too, right? Nice to meet you. I can't translate that word from word from English into Spanish. I can, but nobody says that, and you don't do that, right? But if you hear that as a language learner, nice to meet you, you can just learn that by heart because now you've heard it and you're like, oh, okay, so that's what a native speaker says. Right? That's how you say that. Even if I don't understand the grammar behind it, I can learn it as a chunk, as a word combination, right? So it's a fixed word combination, a chunk. Anything that you hear a native speaker say, that like you can just use yourself as a building block. Instead of using a word as a building block, you use a word combination that already contains the grammar in there. So you know it's correct, you know it's natural, you know it's what native speakers say, and you can use that. And you can do this for everything, right? You don't have to invent any sentence from scratch with words and grammar because native speakers have done the heavy lifting for you, right? Like you use English every day to say probably everything I could ever imagine I wanted to say in English. And you might think, I want to be creative. No, like everything you want to say, someone has already said in the language you want to learn, especially if you're a language learner. You don't want to talk about like astrophysics or something super complicated. Like you want to talk about, I'm hungry. Where do I find, I don't know, like the bus station or like all this stuff that you say on a daily basis. Or I have two sisters. Do you have siblings? Everything you use in normal communication, people have said already. And you can just listen to a native speaker say and just find these word combinations, right? If you do that, you're not translating in your head anymore. You won't have these weird things. And there's so many examples, right? Another example is if you want to say something like, well, the very common one for Spanish speakers is that if they want to say la gente dice que, then they translate word for word. And what you will very often hear Spanish native speakers say, the people says that, right? Yeah. Because it's la gente. There's an article.
Lots of examples, like for example, I completely agree with what you're saying. And I think sometimes frustrates me as a teacher is I'll get students from Latin America. So my students are mostly Latinos. And, you know, they're always frustrated about learning languages. And like for me, a big thing is, like you said, listening. You got to listen from the very beginning because you need to have a point of reference. You need to have a role model to follow, and those are the native speakers. And I wrote a tweet about this like a month ago where I said, I know that you're not listening enough, because if you are still saying I have 35 years old, I know you're not listening, because no native speaker says I have 35 years old. That's it's grammatically wrong. It's I am 35 years old. Actually, in my class yesterday, I had a student, she's pre-intermediate. She's still saying, she lives in Canada. She's still saying, my son has 10 years old. And I just started, has?
Like,
what? Exactly. And it's like, I know that you're not listening to a lot of English because there's no examples of a native English speaker saying I have 10 years old. So I completely agree. You got to be listening from the very beginning.
You listen from the very beginning. And every time this happens, you know, either you're not listening enough or you're translating word for word. The people says or people says is because in Spanish it's singular, but in English it's plural. And you will always make that mistake if you're translating from Spanish into English. Or this one, I have 35 years old. It's because you're translating literally. You don't have to do that. And every time that happens, your first question should be, what does a native speaker say? Not what do the grammar rules say, right? So the more you listen, and especially the more you identify these chunks, the easier it gets. And that's what conversation-based chunking means then. That's a methodology, because this is well researched. Chunking is a very well-researched topic in psychology, also in linguistics. It exists, chunks exist, and they're in your brain in some way in your mother tongue, because you're not thinking about any rule when you speak. You just speak and you know it's correct, is because it's like there's a connection between these words, right? That's how you know. So if you learn a foreign language, start with conversations, and also don't start with like crazy like Wall Street Journal language, because that's not how people speak. So the word combinations you see there is not what someone will say, right? You listen to Kyle, for example, listen to you, or movies is usually also fine. Find conversations and then make an active effort to identify these chunks, right? If you can cultivate that mindset in some way, that you're always looking out for these chunks, these word combinations where you think, oh, okay, so that's what a native speaker says. And I would have said something different based on my words and grammar rules, like brain, or my, like the translating word for word, like tengo 35 años, like I have, or I am. If you see that, you're like, oh, that's different. I didn't know that was how you say it. That's a chunk to learn, right? If you then make an active effort to imprint these and memorize them, I call it imprint, and then just use that yourself, it will be so easy to speak. And you don't have to know the grammar. You don't have to think about the grammar. You can still learn some grammar. It will help you, of course. But in general, even if you just only do this, you will start absorbing the grammar of the language, because you're already using every single day. You're using correct grammar in English because you're using chunks. Even if you don't understand why you're using it correctly, you're still doing that. Same for a kid. A child learns by imitating what he hears, right? And then after a while, the structure is in your head. Then you might make mistakes, and they might extrapolate some things and then make mistakes, but then they very quickly get corrected, and then that changes again. So, but you first start by mimicking, repeating what's already there, and then at some point you can get more creative, of course. But yeah, that's conversation-based chunking. Cultivate that mindset of finding chunks everywhere.
So I think many people, even for me, I might not know. I read your book because I think when I hear chunk, obviously if you're somebody whose language isn't English, you might not even know what chunk is, but chunk is just like a portion of something, a big portion of something. So what is a chunk? Because I think in the book you say a chunk in the beginning is like you made like 2-3 words, but as you advance, it can become a bigger and bigger chunk. So for example, I have a dog. So that's a sentence. Is it also a chunk, or is it too big of is a sentence too big to be a chunk? So yeah, what is a chunk exactly?
I have a dog could be a chunk, depending on your definition and where you're at in your language learning journey. Right? For some people, that might be too complicated. It's also not a very idiomatic expression, I'd say. Right? A chunk, phrase, and chunk is often used interchangeably, right? So a phrase or a chunk. The problem is indeed that you can say, okay, a chunk is always an adjective and a noun, right? Or a noun, an adjective, an adverb, and a noun, right? Or something like that, or a verb and a pronoun, or a preposition and like phrasal verbs or something like that. Or you can say all of that, but then again, you're doing grammar, right? I just like to go, when I learn a new language, to look at sentences and see what is like something that I can just learn by heart. In the beginning, for conjugations, for example, I would probably just learn I have. Because I'm still learning the chunk that after I comes have. Right? After he comes has. Right. So that the very, very beginning, that's what I would learn as a chunk. At some point, you might want to learn I have a dog as a whole. There's not really anything special about that. Like it's almost a direct translation from Spanish into English, so it might not be the most useful one. But yeah, it can be more. It can be by the way, for example, is a good one. By the way, I am like, or struck by lightning, something like that. These are just some examples in English. What often makes sense, at least when I learn Spanish, but also other languages, is that I try to see if I can get some sort of image in my head. Right? If I say I have, try to visualize I have. You can't. There's nothing to visualize about I have. I have a dog. Now I see the dog and it's mine. Right? I call you. The thing in English is that this kind of stuff is not hard grammar-wise, right? Because there's nothing special. If you have another language where, like German, where if it's a direct object, you have to change the article, right? That's when you need to learn these chunks. Like tengo un perro is also easy, but like in German, ich habe einen Hund, whereas ein Hund. So that changes, so then that becomes a chunk. In English, usually you don't have to do that stuff, but there's a lot of like idiomatic expressions. So yeah, what I usually just try to look at it, and I try to first of all visualize something and see, I can visualize this as a whole. I have a dog. That's probably a chunk because it relates together, right? Yeah, it's very hard. Like usually what I do is I just take a lot of examples, or I
Yeah.
would go through, like I could probably do it if you give me the text. I mean, we shouldn't do that right now, but like if you
Yeah.
give me a text right now, I can
Yeah.
just identify them and explain why it's a chunk or why this
Okay.
is a chunk. Usually they get longer and longer as you get more advanced. When you
Yeah.
start out, you just look for the easy things. I have,
Mhm.
he has, what are you
Mhm.
struggling with? Happy birthday, and
Mhm.
all of these set expressions are
Mhm.
all things that you should learn. How are you? Stuff like that. Good morning, even, because in English, in Spanish, it's buenos dias, plural, or buen
Yeah.
dia sometimes.
Yeah.
Stuff that's different in Spanish and English
Mhm.
is also usually a good place to start. If you see
Yeah.
something like mucho gusto, and in
Yeah.
English it's completely different, or
Yeah.
something like, yeah, tengo, and I am 35, and or I have 35 years old. Something like todos los días, every day in English and Spanish,
Yeah.
it's so different. You notice
Yeah.
that this is something that you want to learn and pay special attention to.
Mhm.
Other than that, it's a lot of feeling. Just see, okay, which word combinations can I use that I can use in a conversation myself, right?
Yeah.
It's not that useful to learn I. It is useful to learn I have.
Yeah.
It's even more useful maybe to learn I've got, right? Because I feel that when I want to speak, I don't want to think about verb conjugations. I don't want to do any of that, right?
Mhm.
Ever since I was a child, in the beginning, I would probably say ever since is a chunk,
Mhm.
ever since. After a while, I will take that whole sentence maybe.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to think about, is it ever since I am a child? Is it ever since I have been a child? Or is it ever since I was a child,
Mhm.
right? That's
So
something that in the beginning you don't care about because, I mean,
yeah.
it's way too advanced. But at some point, I will be in a conversation and I will be like wondering which tense do I use here? Huh?
Mhm.
I don't want
Yeah.
to think about that. I want to learn ever since I was a child, and then I will use that, right?
Yeah.
As a whole.
I think people are really good at using chunks. They might not realize it because
Yeah.
for me, when I learned Spanish, like mucho gusto, for me, it wasn't difficult for me to learn that. It's just like, oh, so mucho gusto means nice to meet you. And like
Yes.
buenos
As a whole,
dias
right?
is good morning.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think people sometimes overcomplicate things and they think, oh, I gotta do all this
No.
extra work when
Yeah.
we already
No,
do
you
it
don't.
very well. Buenos dias, mucho gusto,
Yeah,
all
yeah,
those.
exactly. So you just
Yeah.
learn these, and it's mucho gusto. The concept is the chunk, not much pleasure. It's the concept. I want to
Yeah.
say I see myself in a situation where I meet someone new.
Yeah.
I want to say mucho gusto, right?
Mhm.
Or if you're a Spanish native speaker, I meet someone in the US or in Canada. In that situation, which words do I want to have roll of the tongue without thinking about grammar? Nice to meet you, or a pleasure, or any of that, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that's the concept, and it's really easy, and I think everyone does it. Like you say, you do it
Yeah.
automatically if you pay attention to these things.
Yeah.
But then all like traditional language courses and the whole system at school forces you to think in grammar and about mistakes and what is like the rule here to create something. You know, I mean, it's still useful sometimes, but in
Yeah,
general,
for
when you
sure.
want to speak, just listen and then figure out all these chunks. And then in the beginning, it's hard, but then after a while, they just come naturally. You get used to looking for them as well. It is a good exercise for everyone watching your videos in general. Just try to identify some chunks. You're using them all the time, right?
Yeah.
All the time, another chunk. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
They're there all the time.
Yeah.
So you can just listen to any of you have a lot of videos on YouTube, I saw.
Yeah.
If you listen to these, every student can find so many useful chunks in there that maybe you didn't highlight specifically, but then you just listen to what Kyle says.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, this is useful. I can see myself using that same expression or phrase or chunk, and then use that as well.
So let's say you're watching one of my videos, for example, and you see something like all the time that you think is really useful. So if you were in that person's shoes, what do you do with that? Do you put it into a flashcard system? Do you write it down and every day you rewrite the sentence? What is, in your case, your personal strategy or a strategy that somebody could use once they find a chunk that they think is really useful?
Yeah. So this is a strategy that I cover in the book that we also use in our courses, and that works well. Not everyone likes it, but in general, it works well. Again, the strategy is listen, identify a chunk, then memorize it in some way, and then use it yourself, right? These are the 4 steps. So sometimes, not always, but sometimes you listen to something and then just the act of noticing the chunk is enough.
Yeah.
Right? It might be that all the time, like we've said it, like 10 times now in this lesson, you probably don't have to write it on a flashcard anymore. You'll probably remember, oh, during that one interview I watched with Kyle and Lukas, they were talking about all the time. You remember that because there's enough context. Not always though. Like sometimes what I would do if I watch a video and I hear it once, I would put it on a flashcard and we call it a close card. So what I would do is I would take the full sentence where this chunk was used in. So not isolated, we want to have context.
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
So let's say let's say you say in a video, I hear this mistake all the time. Right? Something like that. I would put it on a flashcard. On the front, I hear this mistake, and then I would blank out the chunk. And then between brackets, I would write the Spanish translation. So todo el tiempo, I guess, right? So I hear this mistake, todo el tiempo, right? That's the prompt. That's what you want to learn. And on the back, you just write, I hear this mistake all the time.
Yeah.
If you want, you can then add the full translation. Escucho este error todo el tiempo. Although probably people would say siempre escucho este error. But like it's something like that. Again, so you can't translate word for word, but then you see what you need to fill in, right?
Yeah.
Why do we use close cards and not just chunks? Because if you just add all the time on the flashcard and then you learn like all the time, isolated, it's hard because again, you don't have context. And yes, it solves problems within that grammatical like unit. You don't have to think, but then you don't know how to use it in a sentence. But if you see
like
sentence,
position in the sentence too, right? Like if you use that all the time, you might think, oh, I can put it at the beginning, but no, you can't put it at the beginning. You have to put it at the end.
Yeah, and you can't say, I hear all the time this mistake, right? So that's what people do. So that's why I usually don't recommend that. Like we always do a full sentence on a flashcard.
Okay.
For that reason, and also because it helps with memory, right? I hear this mistake all the time, okay? When you see the flashcard with the prompt, I hear this mistake todo el tiempo, you won't only think of the chunk, you also think again of, this is from Kyle's video where he was talking about this, right? I hear this mistake all the time. If you just use all the time, there's not enough
creating, connections, neural linguistics, or is it neural connections in the brain?
Yeah, exactly. You want as much context as possible, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So that it makes it so much easier. These are good strategies. So you always think back of where did you hear the chunk, which context. Make an effort to just think of that quickly. Like your brain works easier with story, with memory. You know that, like you teach with stories. So if you can think, oh, this was a chunk that I learned from this one video with Kyle where he was talking about common mistakes, and he said, I hear this mistake all the time. If you think of all of that, and it doesn't take long when you're memorizing it, you just do this quickly. Yeah. The next time you learn that, or like that flashcard, it will come back automatically, right? So that's what we do. Put them on flashcards. It can be in Brainscape or Anki or Quizlet, whatever you want to use. Another thing that works there as well is what I said before, right? If you see, I hear this mistake all the time. If you can then imagine a situation in your head where you are using this chunk yourself, that again creates extra neural connections. No? It gives you extra context. With all the time, I don't have a good, but like with mucho gusto, for example, or nice to meet you, that's very easy. No? So you hear it, and then you're like, oh, where will I use this myself? Well, next time I'm in class and there's a new student, I will introduce myself, and then I'll say, oh, mucho gusto, or nice to meet you, right? Or next time I'm in the US, or if you live in the US, I'm somewhere and I meet someone new, then I will just introduce myself. So then you create all these connections and all these, and it will help so much, because then it's not just a bland word list or even a chunk list, which is also not that useful. You're seeing the language in context. Right?
Okay. Yeah. So, because I didn't know before doing this interview with you what you would say, because I was kind of wondering, okay, so I know already that Lukas wouldn't recommend, a vocabulary list. I think I did the same thing as you in university. I learned Spanish and I got really good at it. Just big word list. And then my strategy was every day I'd wake up and then I'd have a piece of paper covering the translation. And then I just like translate. And I memorized a lot of vocabulary that way. But obviously it's not good for speaking naturally. It's good for translating words, but it doesn't really help you when you're in a conversation. But at the same time, you're also not saying, okay, so not a vocabulary list, but also not a chunk list. You don't want to have like a list of chunks. You still want those chunks in the context And you're saying the best strategy is on a flashcard, it could be paper, it could be Anki, it could be, I think you said Brainscape.
Yeah.
Basically take the sentence where you saw the chunk, basically take out what the chunk you're trying to learn from the sentence, put the translation, and then every day, just go through the flashcards, right?
Yeah, go through flashcards, learn some new ones, review some old ones, and and learn that way. It's much easier that way. And it's a bit of work, but it's not that much work. And it worked. I mean, I noticed because I just saw my, like, I opened Anki again after a long time, and I saw my Italian flashcards, which is the first time I actually started doing this. Yeah. And I took back then I used an Assimil book. I don't know if you know Assimil. It's
it's funny you said it. I got Assimil right here for Portuguese. Yeah.
I love Assimil. So it's really, really good. It's a bit old school, and also the dialogues are sometimes a little bit, maybe not for for Italian it was like some of it was a bit weird, but in general it was very, very good because it's all dialogues. You can find so many chunks in there. It has a parallel translation. That's all very, very useful. But I saw these flashcards, and I haven't opened that Assimil book in ages, and I saw the first flashcard, and I was like, oh yeah, that's from this one dialogue there, from this. And I remember where I sat. I sat in a library somewhere in Italy when I was writing that, just because I made that effort at the time to create these connections. And it's 6 years later now. I haven't opened the Anki Dex in 4 years. But just opening it again like triggered a lot of memories, and that just makes it easier to remember things. So that works really well. So Assimil is good.
That's a good advice, because I made flashcards in the past. I made them for my students. I made them for myself. But yeah, I usually just did the classic translation where you put the phrase on the front, translate on the back. It's a little bit of close, but I think what you said about, so the entire sentence that has the chunk that you want to learn inside of it. Yeah, I think that's a really good piece of advice.
Yeah.
And then for you, learning language, so because in a way it kind of seems like chunking is just like a methodology. It's like a mindset, and also a bit of a methodology to complement the big goal of learning the language. So if you're learning a language for the first time, I'm guessing the first thing you're going to want is some sort of dialogue with audio or story with audio to listen to, obviously probably for beginner level. Or in your case, are you listening to advanced stuff from the get-go?
No, like if I'm starting from scratch with a language, I would look for a beginner course that comes with
so I'm guessing like something like Assimil
would be Assimil.
Go-to.
Like we create the courses ourselves now, so we do story-based courses, and it's full dialogues from the beginning. It's also not slowed down speech, which is something else. Listening comprehension, so it's normal speed, but you get a transcript and a translation, so you can just listen and read at the same time. That's what we do now, so that's what I would also use. And just start with dialogues from the beginning. Might make sense sometimes to learn maybe 100 or 200 like very frequent words in the very beginning, because that just helps.
This gives you your base, right?
Yeah, and then you're not going to learn anything from that, like in terms of like speaking, but it will help with like to get used to some of the most basic words that you'll see in chunks all the time, right? So that's maybe the only time I would recommend learning some words. And then right after that, just find a course with audio, ideally, definitely a transcript, ideally a parallel translation, and start finding chunks. And then you might not. Actually, I started learning Sanskrit a couple of weeks ago.
Is that the Hindu, the Indian?
It's it's not that used that much anymore. I'm learning it more because I got into yoga lately, and then I was like, so many words of like, I want to learn a bit more about that language. I found a website with, first I looked up like all the beginner courses and was like, I don't know, this is like a lot of grammar. Found a website with only stories, very short stories, often stories that only use like 10 words or 20 words. And I just did what I always do. I just started reading them, trying to find chunks in there, and putting them on flashcards. It's literally what I'm doing right now, and it works. And in the beginning it's hard, and I need a little bit more time to like understand like, oh, why does the ending of this word change? It's probably because it's a grammar case, and probably they have word endings that change. I don't know why, but I'm already learning it by heart, right? So from the very beginning, there's no audio with it, which I find very annoying. So that's something I need to
I always find annoying when you get a language course and like, where's the audio?
There's no audio. It's like,
it's a good course. It's like, okay, I need the audio, or else what's the point?
But then again, maybe with Sanskrit it's a bit different, but normally always find audio. But it's interesting, and it's interesting for me because it's been a while since I learned a language from scratch. To see that it's still, I mean, at least, okay, maybe it's it's again like an Indo-European language. Maybe if you learn Japanese or something like that, it will be a bit harder.
Yeah.
But with this language, I do the same thing. I read the sentence, I see what it is in English. I try to see like what is the chunk here, what's used. It's often stuff like the Buddha is the son of a queen or something like that, right?
Okay. Yeah.
But then the son of a queen is a chunk in Sanskrit.
Yeah.
And I just learned that as a chunk. And it might sound very advanced, and it's like, is it useful? I don't know, but I'm trying to imprint, without knowing the grammar rules already, these structures. And then at some point I'll probably learn, if you have possessive, you need to do this. And I'm like, I've seen that before. I'm already using that correctly. And now I've learned the rule, why you need to change this word ending there. It's so much easier, right? Instead of starting with the grammar rule and then trying to string it together in a sentence. I'm just learning random chunks with random structures, and I don't understand that much yet, but I can already use them if I wanted to. And at some point, I will learn the grammar and I'll be like, that makes sense because I'm already doing it. Right?
Yeah.
So then I
for me,
understand.
it's so much easier to learn grammar when you have so many examples already in your mind, like learning Russian or Spanish or Portuguese. If you give yourself tons of experience already, and then somebody explains the grammar to you, months after you've already started, it's kind of like, oh yeah, it's like, I've seen that before. It's not that difficult. Whereas if you start with the grammar, it's so frustrating. And I think that happens with lots of people who learn a language for the first time. They start with the grammar. They get really frustrated because it makes no sense. And then they give up when really they should have just started with, fun, silly, short stories or dialogues in the beginning. And then later on, they might learn some grammar, which, that's why they do it. Okay, now it makes sense.
That's why.
So I
same
totally
with
agree with that.
With like ser and estar in Spanish, right? There's so
many
many
rules
for that. But let's say that you start with like easy dialogues. Hola, soy Lucas, soy profesor de idiomas, for example. It's not, I'm not really a teacher, but let's say that's that. So I learned soy profesor, right? Not soy un profesor, but soy profesor. Right? So you don't have to use the article already. That's something that English native speakers trip over. But that's the first thing. But soy profesor, I learned that by heart as a chunk in the very beginning. Let's say 3 months later, I get the rules for ser and estar. And then they say, ser you need to use with a profession, for example. Like, I don't need to like remember that rule because I already learned and reviewed the flashcard with soy profesor so often. I know that. So if I think of what should I use here, I know soy because soy profesor, and not because the rule it's for professions, right? If you start with that, it gets so much easier. And it's with everything, like you say. If you have some examples already, everything just becomes much, much easier.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think to try to finish this off, you learned Spanish. So I was wondering, just for people who are watching this, probably Latinos watching it. So in your case, how did you learn Spanish, and what is your Spanish language learning journey? Was it like with lots of chunks? Was it a bit of you went to Spain? From what I know from Europeans, they usually go to Spain. Because most Europeans, I've seen Europeans in Latin America. I think Canadians, Americans, we prefer to go to Latin America. The Europeans, they go to Spain. So is it the same for you? You just went to Spain and you started to learn the language. What was your story learning Spanish?
Well, I guess geographically it makes sense, right? It's
exactly.
But so I actually spent a lot of time in Mexico and Latin America in the past couple of years. So that's where I really learned Spanish. But I started learning Spanish I think when I was 20 years old, because when I was doing my exchange semester in Edinburgh, I met a Spanish girl. She was my girlfriend for a year and a half. I learned some Spanish. I took courses, but again, it was a traditional way. I learned some Spanish. I could understand a bit, but it was also Spanish from Spain. I find it way harder than Latin American Spanish because it's much faster. People speak like very, very fast. So I learned some. My Spanish wasn't that good back then. Then I gave up on Spanish when I moved to Italy and just focused on Italian completely. And then I think in 2019, I started going to Mexico because a friend of mine moved to Mexico for work. And then I visited him because I just wanted to discover Mexico.
For sure.
I was in Mexico, I think once or twice that year. I stayed for quite a bit for a while, since I can work from anywhere.
So which parts of Mexico were Mexico City, Puerto Vallarta?
So I
Playa del
spent
Carmen?
quite some time in Mexico City, then in
Mhm.
Puerto Vallarta a couple of times as well. Most of the time I was in Mexico City.
Yeah.
So I think in 2019 I spent like 2 months or so there, 3 months.
Okay.
Then in 2020 I had a Mexican girlfriend. So then I lived there for I think 8 months or so in total,
Okay.
8 or 9 months.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's basically how I learned Spanish, or I just use it every day by living in the country. And not only living in the country, I mean, I like when you're constantly interacting with, like, you can live in Mexico and always speak English, and maybe sometimes on the street speak some Spanish, but then I mean, I had the girlfriends, so your whole social circle moves to that, and your daily conversations move to Spanish. In 2018 or 2019, I started using chunking, right? So then I think I got an assimil. I had my own Spanish courses already back then. I also got an assimil book, and I just did like massive like chunking flashcard creation and review. So that I did at that point. I already had a basis, like foundational knowledge, and I made it easier. But then just living in the country and not only learning the chunks, but also speaking all the time, of course, and using them. That made a big difference, getting tons of exposure. It makes it easier. It's not necessary. You can learn a language without, like, I've only lived in Germany for a couple of months, but I still learn it to a high level also just by listening a lot and by learning chunks and practicing a lot. But it helps if you go to the country. It helps even more if you then get like intense social relationships or romantic, but also just in general, if you have friends, or like you go living in Colombia, for example, and for a couple of months you speak Spanish almost all the time, then that helps a lot.
Yeah, like you said, somebody could easily go to another country and never speak the language. There's Latinos in United States who don't speak any English, and they live there for 20 years. And me being in Latin America all the time, it's pretty easy, like, just to avoid speaking Spanish. Like, when you get groceries, you don't need to speak Spanish. You get the groceries, you pay. And if you have no social relationships, like you said, then you really don't need to use Spanish at all. So you have to kind of force yourself, if you go to another country, to make those social relationships.
And so you said you were in Colombia, right? Or not?
I would say the 3 main countries that I've been in Latin America are Argentina, Colombia, and Mexico. And then I'm learning Portuguese right now. So I want to go to Brazil. In the next year, hopefully, like maybe February, March, something like that. So that's the plan right now. And then when you were in Mexico City, which colonia were you in? Do you remember? Roma Norte? Were you in Polanco?
I was in Polanco. So I was staying in an apartment with friends. It's I would say it's more expensive than Europe, actually, Polanco.
Polanco is it's the Beverly.
I know there's a big debate about the big debate about like expats or Americans, Europeans coming to Mexico City,
and then driving
up
last
the prices.
Year, like the gentrification. They say it's bad. I haven't been there in like a year, but I heard it's got really bad the last year.
So now I was there for a couple of weeks. Closer to Ángel de la Independencia, so Roma Norte. No, back then I was in Polanco, and it's sad to say I contributed a bit to the gentrification back then, I guess. But that was a nice area.
I got lots of Mexicans that follow me, so I guess quick questions about Mexico. Was there a specific Mexican food that you liked while you were in Mexico, or something that you fell in love with about the food? Because I love Mexican food, and most people that go to Mexico love the food, but I'm curious to know if there's a taco or a special dish that you tried that you liked.
Let's see. I'm going to say some things, and then maybe I get shot down by. I like to go to El Califa, which is a taco place. Maybe you know it if you're in Mexico City.
Well, in Polanco or a different part?
There's lots of El Califas.
So it's like a chain of taquerias. Okay.
There, I would usually get consomé de pollo, which I like a lot.
So like chicken soup, more or less, right?
Taco al pastor con todo is what I usually get, and I like costra or pita there as well, like with some cheese on top, and then whatever meat, farachera or something like that. That I liked a lot. Aguachile is something I like a lot as well. Thinking what else did I like? I think these are the main things. I went to also had the what was it? It's not a consomé de pollo, but it's a soup.
Consommé de like the
from
barbacoa. Is it more from beef than from chicken?
no, it was what was the name again?
Pozole.
Casa de Toño. Pozole from Casa de Toño. This
Oh
is
yes, yes, yes. Very
you
famous.
know this
Yeah, very
one.
famous.
Yeah. So
Actually,
this
I don't think I ever tried it because every time I went, yeah, because it's very popular in Mexico City, and there's always a line, and so I always would go past it and say, I don't want to wait in a line for half an hour. But of course, yeah, pozole is delicious for sure.
pozole is delicious. Yeah.
What about lots of waters? They call it water in Mexico, agua.
And I was.
Were there any aguas, any waters that you liked from Mexico when you were there?
Agua de horchata is one that I like.
Oh,
Also
it's
because
delicious.
sometimes like I like to try all the salsas they give you, but there's always one that like is so spicy that you're dying.
It hits you like.
So then it's nice to have agua de horchata. It's a bit like milk, you know. So then I have that. Other than that, I drink normal water. I haven't tried that many different ones. Jamaica is nice as well. Yeah.
I like them for sure. All right, good. Well, any future plans to go to Latin America more? Do you want to? Because I know that you like traveling and you like going places, but I think you're also like you moved into a new place, so it also kind of sounds like you're trying to settle down a bit more. But do you have plans to go to other countries or to go to Latin America again?
So I was there up to like 2 weeks ago. I came back from Mexico actually.
Okay,
I was in Mexico
I saw
City.
some
I was
pictures
there
on
for the
Instagram.
conference.
Okay.
And then I was in Quintana Roo for a while. Tulum. I've also been like visited some places there. I was there for 6 weeks, so that was a nice. Hope to go back soon.
Yeah,
it's getting pretty cold here in Belgium.
Of course.
But it's also, I mean, I've been like in the past. I lived in Italy and then moved around a lot. France as well. Now I'm back in Belgium. I got a new place, and I'm trying to settle down a little bit more to have more of a home base.
Yeah, for sure.
And then like travel maybe for a month or 2 months and go to some new places. I don't practice languages or just Mexico is just a fun country to go to, and I like people there, and it's like Spanish is an amazing language, so it's always fun to go there. So I hope to go back in 2023, but I don't have any specific plans to go anywhere right now.
And your main business is Spring Languages. So you started that in 2019 or
2020? So we started during the pandemic, actually. I think in summer of 2020, we started Spring Languages. We started with Spring Spanish. We have Spring English, a channel that maybe your followers might also want to check out. There's some content there on chunking. Maybe it's even like you can even do a video together with Paulísima, with her teacher. So she teaches Spanish for English native speakers, and then she also teaches English for so she does both, right?
I've seen your Spanish language channel, but I haven't watched the videos in depth because I already know Spanish. There's a few good channels, and like Dreaming Spanish is another one. You probably know about Dreaming Spanish. Pablo's really good. I did an interview with him. But at the same time, it's like, well, I already know Spanish. I don't really want to watch a video about Paula putting on her clothes. It's like, okay, I already know how to say it. But are your teachers teaching mostly Spanish from Spain, or are they teaching Spanish from Latin America, or is it a mixture?
It's all Latin America.
Oh, Latin America. Okay.
We started with several teachers, a couple from Mexico. There was one from Venezuela who lived in Argentina. Right now we have two teachers. We still have videos from the other teachers, of course, but there's two that are currently making new videos. Paulísima, who's from Mexico, and then we have Maura, who lives in Spain, but she's from Venezuela. So we teach mainly Latin American Spanish, sometimes neutral, but I mean we focus on Latin American Spanish.
And because I think some of the videos are the typical videos on YouTube, like videos that I make, don't say this, the chunky mistakes. So when people don't do chunking and they make the mistakes, right?
Exactly.
But I also looked at the Spring Spanish website. I know you guys got a course. Are your courses very different from the videos that you produce, or are they connected? Because sometimes with language institutes online, they make videos to try to get attention because it's difficult sometimes. So is your video content very similar to your course content, or is it very separate?
So it's not separate, as in our explanations, like grammar explanations in our courses, are from our YouTube videos, right? But what we do is, the course is completely separate in terms of content, right? So what we do is we write, we talked about this before, like the translating screenplays. We're writing a story. It's a story about, it's called Los Cazadores de Tormentas, a storm chaser that moves to Mexico. So it's a whole story with dialogues, a bit like we talked about today. It comes with dialogues and different chapters, dialogues professionally recorded in a studio.
Yeah.
For upper beginners, I think we start for this course. So it's upper beginners, it's a dialogue, comes with a transcript, parallel translation. We highlight chunks in our courses and we create all the flashcards.
Yeah.
Then
okay, so the students don't have to do it. They can just basically get the course and they have everything ready for them.
Yes. And then we do lesson notes, right? So we say, let's say they're learning mucho gusto, right?
Yeah.
Then we highlight a chunk. And then in the lesson notes, we would say something like, mucho gusto is a chunk that's often used. Here are 5 different ways to say or to greet someone. And then we link to a video, right?
Okay.
Or we would have some sort of grammar thing, ser and estar. We say, oh, here we use soy profesor. Do you know why? Well, watch this video to get all the explanation, right? Yeah. So we always link in that way because we have so many videos. I mean, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. These are well-researched, good videos on the topic. But the content itself is very structured. So we really created a structured course with a story where you learn all the grammar necessary, or like the grammatical structure, maybe. You learn the chunks that are useful. We cover all the situations that you will find yourself in if you go to a Spanish-speaking country. So in that way, our courses are the structured version of the videos. And I mean, you know, we create content for YouTube. It's a bit more entertainment. The course is really, okay, now you're ready.
Are you serious about
serious?
Okay, so
take this course, right? If you just want to learn a bit of Spanish, then you watch YouTube videos where you learn like a chunk here or there, but not like a structured way of learning every day.
Exactly. I think a similar strategy to me, like, if you're serious about learning English, then I've written so many stories for you. So take a look at them. All right. So I guess if there's a Latino here who has a gringo friend, well, there's a course that you can take from Lukas. It's Spring Spanish, right?
Spring Spanish.
It's springspanish.com. And but like the main company is Spring Languages, right? And that's what your partner's name. He's from Germany. What's his
Gabriel
name?
Gelman. He has a big, if you're learning German, I mean, we're actually doing Spring German now as well. So we're starting with German videos if you ever want to learn German, Kyle. But like Gabriel has a big website in Germany, Sprachheld, it's called.
Oh, okay.
Language Hero, Sprachheld. So there, like, he has that. I've had these conversations. What we do together is Spring Languages. And it's a lot of fun. I mean, it's good.
Good. So if anybody's interested, take a look. I'll put the links down below in the description. Good. And maybe just to end the interview, is there any advice? Well, you talked a lot about chunking, but any other advice that you want to give somebody learning a language for the first time? Anything that you wish you knew when you were first starting, or that you think is really important for somebody who, for example, wants to get a high level of English?
Your goal is speaking. Don't bother too much with the grammar rules, and don't let exams or tests distract you and stress you out when you're speaking, because it's normal. You often need to take certifications. It's unavoidable. You'll have to learn a lot of grammar for that. That's not the real world out there. Nobody's going to judge you as badly as an exam, like examinator grading your essay. So I kind of feel like a lot of people get so stressed because they don't want to make mistakes. It is not good to make mistakes. I believe it's really bad because they fossilize in some way, like they get stuck in your brain. But you need to speak and just listen a lot. Like, you don't have to speak from day one even. I don't believe in that advice. If you really want to get to a high level, speak and don't be afraid to make mistakes, but focus 80% of your time on listening, on observing, on finding these chunks. Even if you don't speak for 3 months, if you have that like luxury or that to do that, start by listening so much that you get the feel for the language, I understand things, and start with that. Right? You don't have to speak from the very first day, because you're going to make mistakes and you're going to like be struggling all the time. If it's necessary, do it, but if not, just listen more and don't get too stressed out by unreasonably high standards that like exams or grammar exams or language certificates set for you.
I completely agree with that. I would say the same thing. If you have to take a test, do it, but it doesn't mean anything about your progress. It doesn't mean anything about your level, or if you're good or you're not. It's just they make you do that. That's one thing my students like about my class is like, I have to take tests with you. And it's like, it's because I don't really think they're necessary. You're going to get better. You're going to get better. And what you said about listening, I completely agree. If you spend most of your time on listening, I think I like reading as well, but I would say the listening is so important because obviously.
Yeah, maybe I'll change my advice. Listen while reading, no? Because if you just listen,
I think you,
it's also hard.
I think you, Ollie, myself, anybody who's learned the language, I think would say just listening and reading. I know
listening and reading. Yeah,
I know with Latinos, I tell them to read and they don't really like it. Like, oh, I got to read something, but it makes it the easier. If you want to just focus on listening, that's fine. But I would say, maybe you give a better number, but you will double your results, you triple your results if you're combining that with reading. It's easier for the brain to make connections. Yeah,
you just need the exposure, and it's easier with reading. But I mean, the holy grail is audio that comes with a transcript, right? So you're listening and reading, and you see every word that's being said, and you notice everything. You can find chunks if you want to do that, right? The phrases. So that's the holy grail, right? But in general, it doesn't matter. Just listen, just read, do whatever you can to get input. You don't have to read super complicated literature, because that's not going to help you if you want to speak. If you like reading literature, then read literature. So that's pretty solid advice, I think, that you're giving your students, Kyle. So I would agree with that.
Well, thanks, Lucas. Yeah, I feel like I'm doing a better job now. Good. All right, Lucas. Well, I don't want to take up more of your time. It was a great conversation. It was great talking to you.
It was a pleasure.
So yeah, anybody's interested in what Lucas does, I'll leave the links for his different businesses, his websites down below. And also, you're on social media. Is there any social media that people should follow if they want to follow you?
Yes, I think mainly Instagram right now, or LinkedIn if you want to. So my Instagram handle, maybe you can put it somewhere.
I'll put it in the description.
Lucas van V. I'm not super active at the moment, so I'm doing like I said before.
We were talking about that before. So
I'm not sure if I'll go back to using it more often, but maybe I'll just post, but then not like engage that much. I think I will still use it. There's some content about language learning there. I'm also writing a daily blog post more in general about like habit creation and discipline.
Actually, I don't want to take more of your time, but I probably would want to get more advice from you about creating that routine. Because that's a hard thing for a lot of people learning languages. Like, what's a good routine and all that.
So that's something we can talk about another time. I'm writing more about that. It's separate to my personal website, so I'm writing more there. But that's more about discipline and habit building, and I'm posting a little bit more about that on my private social media. For language learning content, Spring Spanish, effortless conversations. It's probably the best place to go.
All right, sounds good. All right, Lucas. Well, thank you very much. It's almost Christmas.
Thank you.
So, I don't know what your plans are, but Merry Christmas to you, and hopefully we'll talk again in the future. All right.
Likewise. Merry Christmas. Enjoy the holidays, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah. Bye, Lucas.
Bye.